let's get started. We have a few people coming in, so it's good. So I'm going to be the moderator of this session. My name is Carolina Vega. And here today we have Sergio Nanita, and he's a principal investigator at IFF. Assistant Professor Frederique Deiss, she's a professor at IUPUI. And Jason Chruma, which is assistant professor at University of Virginia. Thank you all for joining us at this effort. And I would like to start with the first question, and also just so everybody knows, we're gonna keep this roundtable really informal, just to ask questions, feel free to ask questions and just share the experience, because that's what we want, just know more about being international and or how you are related to international affairs. So the title of this session is called "The World Must Learn to Work Together. Finally, it will not work all means to you." What does it mean to you? And you guys can decide the order.
I'll take it first very quickly, and I'll make a very quick correction, Carolina. And I know that I made the change late. I am no longer a principal investigator at IFF. I am representing the International Activities Committee, where I'm the chair of that ACS unit at ACS. In terms of the meaning of having the world work together, or it will not win or succeed at all, what comes to mind are the challenges of humanity that are global and do not know any borders at all. I mean, climate change comes to mind. Another good example is the pandemic that we're fighting. Pandemics do not know borders. So definitely there are many scientific breakthroughs that we have conquered as a human race, working together globally, but there is much more that can be done, especially when it comes to the current challenges and problems that do not know borders that affect everyone.
Hi, I'm Frederique. I can go next. So for me, this quote, "The world must learn to work together, or finally it will not work at all," I felt that it was not linked specifically just to international, but even true at every level of what we do. Personally, being a professor in a university, and I've also working in industry before, I also see this really between the world of academia and industry, but also between culture and diversity. So for me, this is something that we need to start in our own little cell, like in our module, like our lab, and go to our whole company and whole institution, whole country, and then the whole world. So it's really true at so many levels that definitely we need to all learn to take from each other to make the world a better place in general, work and living in. So.
Yeah, when I first heard or read this statement, I thought the latter part was a bit too extreme, because there certainly have been times where cultures have been separated from each other. But like Sergio said, the challenges that we're facing as the populations grow and we do start becoming more connected, there are global challenges that indeed we do have to work together. And really the first part of the statement, that the world must work together, is probably something that's driven my whole outlook and my actions throughout most of my life, at least since grade school, and including, inspiring me to take a job in China from 2005 to 2020, where I was a professor at Sichuan University. It was a big step. I didn't speak the language or anything, but this whole concept of seeing that there was a lot of a lack of understanding, and on my part and a lot of my colleagues when I was here at Virginia before, as to what was on the other side of the world. And the only way to know that was to go there and to learn it and to work together, to put myself in an uncomfortable situation and to learn how to work together to hopefully forge some relationships, as well as a way so that, we will work at all instead of falling apart.
Awesome, thank you. So the next question that I have for you, just from different perspectives. Sergio is from Dominican Republic and Dr. Deiss is from France. Jason, are you US, right? A citizen?
Yes, I'm a US citizen.
So, but you have the perspective of working in China, and I guess you probably suffer with like the stereotype, like, oh, you are a US American citizen. So what kind of barriers and challenges you have to deal, like either here in the US or in China?
Yeah, it was definitely an eye-opening experience being over there. It's sometimes, as a foreigner in China in particular, because China is a relatively monolithic culture, in that a large, over 90% of the population is Han Chinese, and they have very similar cultural upbringings. They'll make fun of each other from different provinces or everything, but really there's not a lot of differences. So showing up as a foreigner, independent of where you are, first of all, you're a foreigner. So that was kind of interesting. We all got lumped into the same group. And so I ended up making friends from all over the world because we were all lumped in the foreigner category. But also just the, sometimes you feel like a celebrity and other times you feel like an ornament, right? And just those, we're so glad to have this person here, but when you try to contribute to the overall development or growth of the department, or feel like a working contributing member, there's this like, well, we'll deal with that. You just do your own thing as a foreigner, but this is a local thing, and what could you contribute to this? And there was other situations, certainly around the pandemic, things got a little insular and isolated. And so there were times that as a foreigner, I was not allowed to enter certain buildings. Even though I had been there the whole time, I had never left the area. I was never exposed my whole time there, but I just wasn't allowed because they weren't taking any chances. Like, well, no foreigners in here. So those were experiences that I hadn't had before, and gave me a lot of sympathy for foreigners and other cultures back here in the States, that now coming back, realizing that I just got a little foretaste, a little tiny fraction of what people have had to deal with their whole lives.
I can comment, Carolina, if I may. For me, in terms of my experience, just growing as a scientist and as a person, going from Dominican Republic, where I grew up, but now it's been so long, and I have actually lived outside of Dominican Republic more than I lived there growing up. So at present, I see myself as a Hispanic American, and I treasure that heritage. But along the way, I went to high school in Dominican Republic, then I went to college in Puerto Rico, then I came to the US, and it's been 20 years since I've been living on the mainland US. So now I can see the differences and how rich each aspect of the Hispanic and Latino culture are when you go from country to country. So the times I have gone back to Dominican Republic, then I realized, wow, yes, I have forgotten that piece of the culture, and it's very rewarding just to experience it again. At the same time, it makes me realize I'm different because I have just picked up along the way all of these other features that in the end just makes me more aware of the cultural differences amongst all of us. One piece that I'll mention that's so satisfying is when I go back to Latin America on behalf of the American Chemical Society, and now as a Hispanic American, and I get to speak at a university or at an event in any Spanish speaking country, or even in Brazil. I did learn Portuguese along the way. And I talk to people in their own language. It's so meaningful to them to see someone from the United States come back representing an American institution and connect to that level with the public. So I feel the appreciation, and it's something I encourage to anyone. Pick up a second language if you can, and it's definitely gonna do well for you as a, personally, as well as in your profession.
So for me, as Karina mentioned, I'm from France, but before to arrive in the US, where I'm now in Indianapolis, but before that, I actually made a list. I ended up in the University of Padova in Italy and in University of Venice in Italy. I was also at Tufts University in Boston, Massachusetts, in Harvard University in Boston. In between, I also went in Canada, in University of Alberta in Edmonton, and I also did an internship in industry in England, close to London. So I've literally been a foreigner in multiple countries and continents. And I think for me, what I found everywhere, which was interesting, I don't know if it's also because I'm a woman or no, but when people will realize I'm French by my accent, because you don't get rid of the accent, so you're always like, you say 3 words and people are like, oh, where are you from? It was very difficult for them to understand I was a chemist. Everybody will assume that I'm a French literature professor, you know, even if I say I'm a teacher. So it's like, oh, or like when I was younger, I was an au pair, you know, I must be an au pair person somewhere. So it was difficult to be taken seriously as a scientist, weirdly. So if I'm a science conference, yes, but as soon as I was, you know, a little bit outside or like trying to interview, people will just not understand that, no, I'm not trying to be an admin or a translator or something. I'm actually a chemist. So that was kind of a stereotype that I had to go around. And kind of as Sergio also mentioned it, for me, it was a bit weird. It's like, I've not done the calculation, but I might also been out of France more than I've been in France now. And it's like, when I go back in France, they don't really consider me as French anymore. Like I'm too different almost, you know, culturally. But I had the same feeling that when I present in science conference and I can actually present things even in French, I'm told I present like an American. And when I'm asking what does it mean, they cannot tell me what it is. But apparently they have seen me shifting in my way of presenting. Apparently we sell things more, or I don't know, or like I've been told that when you present as an American, you're a bulldog. When I was presenting as a French person, I was a butterfly, or all this weird like thing coming on. But it's still always great, and it's great to see the different people and to meet thing. And I will share one anecdote of something that I've seen coming from one country to another. As chemists, you guys will understand in our audience as well, is looking sometime at the difference, not just in culture and how people are, but how we handle our day-to-day lab. And something which really reached to me is I use triple amine as a reagent in multiple countries to do electrochemistry. And in France, we had our bottle, we were like 90% purity, we were fine with it, and it was okay. In Italy, you were having the 80% of a label, but if you wanted the 95% or above, it was actually locked in a chemical cabinet in the PI's office. You could not have it there. When I arrived in the US in one of the lab, they actually could not find the 95% bottles. They just ordered another one. So you had 2 or 3 bottles of 95% high purity reagent going around. And for me, it was interesting because this was really showing more like, you know, the wealth and how you, you know, interact with your lab. But seeing it just at the level of a reagent or even glass pipette. I mean, in the US and in France, we do throw them away. In Italy, they were actually rinsing them and reusing them. And so it was interesting for me as an anecdote to see that, like, the first thing in Italy, when I throw a pipette, it was like, oh my God, what are you doing? I used it? Well, no, you rinse and reuse. And so being able to want to learn even how to do basic lab experiment again, when you go from one country into another, was also a little barrier, but interesting as well.
That was really intense, like, especially for me from perspective, like where I come from, like when it comes to science, we don't have all the resource that we have here in the US available to us. Sometimes you just like need to wait so long for a reagent to come in here, just like, here, just go and do your analysis. And it's just like, yep, it's a way different. Thank you so much for your replies. So I have another one, and also just make sure for people that are attending this session, you can put the questions on the Q&A, and then we can again ask for you. If you're an international student, after you graduate, how and where to start the transition to the workforce? What are the piece of advice that you give to international students?
I'll make one comment simply because I know many students do not consider the possibility of starting outside of the US. And I'll mention, especially in the private sector. So I know the challenges that students face if they're international students getting the education in the United States, and then there are certain law requirements, there are visa requirements to be able to work in the US. And often it's a hurdle that becomes insurmountable. So what I encourage everyone getting educated, of course, is to consider the global marketplace, especially if you find those hurdles to be too strong to overcome. So multinational companies, the most prestigious companies in the private sector will likely have a global footprint. They have very prestigious research centers outside of the US and possibly in your country of origin. So those companies see candidates with an education in a Western nation, either in Europe or the US, as phenomenal candidates when they want to go back home and put a few years of work. It can be a stepping stone where you can go back to a different country, work for that company, and they would often, after you have proven yourself, sponsor you to then relocate either to the US or Europe or when you want to be. So it's just a consideration. It's not for everyone, of course, but in case some of the attendees here are not aware, that's always an option, just to work for in the private sector in a different country, prove yourself, and that same company may sponsor you to relocate to the US or to relocate to Europe or anywhere else you want to be with your family.
I can go next. The first thing I would say is, as an international student, you cannot wait to have graduated to transition. So the first thing is international, like we are on another time scale. And I will still mention, for outside of US, people who want to now stay in the US, I have lived it firsthand recently. The timeline got way longer. We are talking about things which used to take a month, we're now taking 9 months or more. So the timeline is very different. So we cannot just say, let's graduate and then we will think what I will do. No, I will say, you last year of graduation, you already want to have mapped out what you want to do. So you can start prospecting, and so you can start finding company, and then you can ask all the good questions. If you were there at the previous session, they had a lot of, they mentioned not how you can ask at interview or even before interview networking, you know, will they sponsor you or not? Will they sponsor you for visa and or permanent residency and all these kind of things? And it is true. Like, I mean, I remember at one point when I was looking for a postdoc, I was like checking, and if they would not sponsor you, they would be okay if you were already permanent resident to work with them. But if they had to sponsor you, they just didn't have the time to do it at this moment because they wanted someone now. There is also no point for you to lose your time. So I keep them on my box. So later on, maybe I can contact these people again. But then it's like really looking for the company where you can do your jump, and don't like close yourself. I mean, we are saying it, the whole world is open, you know, the world is your oyster pretty much. So don't be limited, and don't think of it as like, oh, I will go in this country forever. I will stay in the US forever. I will go in Europe forever. I will go back to my country forever. You can go there for a couple of years and go back. I mean, personally, I wanted to hopefully stay in the US, but after my postdoc in United States in Harvard, it was just not happening. I tried to find something around, and with the timeline got short. Well, guess what? I was able to go for 2 years in Canada, and then I applied again for position both in Canada and US, and now I'm in Indianapolis. But like, it's you want to be willing to hop around and look things, but like, you need to be your best friend on that, and you need to be creating opportunities for yourself and start early, and always think it's unfair versus national, but you will need to deal with two problems: your international aspect and you're trying to get the job. So, but very often you will be seen as an asset, like Sergio said. They like us, so everywhere, so it's good.
You know, Frederique, you really hit that really strong, because if you wait till you graduate, it's too late, and it's way too late. This was a question that I would answer for a lot of my students when I was back in China. So the ones who just graduated and were heading to the US or to Canada or to the UK for graduate school, and you know, they're thinking about a job, I told them, you know, don't wait until you graduate to get the job. Start right away. And the main thing that I would emphasize to them was to begin the networking right away. for a lot of the Chinese students, the internal networking within other Chinese students was not difficult. That was they are very community minded in that way, and so if they wanted to get a job back in China, that was fine. They developed that community. Where it got tougher is, well, what if I want to stay in this country? What if I want to go to another country? And establishing those connections outside of their own people group was a harder thing to get over. But also, I feel essential, because making those connections, and especially to the students who are a couple of years ahead of you and are heading out to the workforce, to stay connected with them and say, hey, how do you like your job? What's going on there? What can you tell me? Keeping and making those connections, and not waiting until the end, until you've graduated or until you're looking for a job, to start moving forward on that, I think is a great piece of advice. I think one more: if you are a graduate student, international graduate student, make it clear to your PI, to your super advisor, what your career goals are, which might mean you have to know what your career goals are at that point too, and they might change over time, but make it clear to them. Don't wait until, oh, I'm going to graduate and I'm going to look for a job. Give them a year, give them a couple of years, and kind of let them know, this is what I'm thinking, just so they can be ruminating on it and trying to make some of those connections for you as well.
Awesome. That was great answers. So going along those lines, you think if you are a non-US candidate, do you need to let recruiters know something special during the interview process, or you think just well, that piece of information is gonna come sometime, or should we just hey, I might need sponsor, or just be wide open? Or even CVs, do we need to put right there on the CVs or resumes that we need sponsor?
I think honesty will always be in your side. You have to be honest about it if the topic comes up. On the resume, I don't think you need to put it on the resume, because that comes up later. Mm-hmm. Often it comes up in the job application when you complete the job application online. So it does not need to be on the resume. But if it is asked at an interview question, oh, of course you have to disclose and be open about it. That's my perspective, and that actually applies to everything related to the job hunt and the interview and the career transition process. Dishonesty is a big no. You have to be open, you have to be candid, and both on your areas of strength as well as the areas that you need to improve and where your interest lies. I think, like Jason said, being open and honest with going back to where you're still with your advisor in school, express your interest, because they'll help you connect you with the right people. But during the interview process, of course, honesty is a must.
So well, I totally agree, of course, with what everything Sergio said. I've seen it on CV, but not when people need sponsorship, but when people was already permanent resident. Mm. So sometimes it's not needed, and you don't have to put it. It's kind of even nationality or your gender and such on. But sometimes if you're applying to a job and you're already permanent resident because for XYZ reason you have already done everything, it can make your company at ease, especially if it's a smaller company, because then they're oh, we don't need to deal with sponsoring you. So you're already there, and it's done deal pretty much. So this is when I've seen it. I've never seen people putting for needing a sponsorship, but to say I'm on call already. So that can be an advantage for it. What I would say, especially for the CV or even before the interviewing, I think as non-US candidate to apply to a job, we need to make very clear that we can communicate in English. And so, and when it's a text or an email, sometimes people can wonder, well, maybe you spend 10 hours writing 3 lines email, or you have someone else writing it for you or something like this. So being very clear, even on your CV, what are you fluent, or are you having the technical English? If you have any type of TOEFL, TOEIC, or whatever language certificate, put your score there, because this is where like the most question of like recruiter can be is like, well, okay, this person is clearly they're good with the science, but are they okay to communicate? And nowadays everything's about communication. If it's for a university, even a grad student, can they TA? That's actually the question we ask ourselves for a grad student coming from international. And sometimes we say, well, we need to interview them to make sure that they can communicate. So that will be a big thing that I think a US candidate don't need to worry, but we need to worry about. And during an interview, I don't really think that I would put all the, me personally, put all the idea of like, do I need sponsor or whatever in it? I will either have it before when we are setting up the interview and asking kind of more the admin question, or afterwards, because very often it's also a different person. I mean, as chemists, we tend to do our interview with like scientists pretty much, and the sponsorship and everything is more almost handled with HR people. So it's very different. So you kind of want to have it in, and definitely don't want to lie if the question comes up, like you would want to be very clear about it. But I also like personally to stay in the science and show how I'm passionate about the job and how I'm good for the job, and not having it defined because I am or I'm not a foreigner in the situation. So for me, it's something I like to handle before or after, but not in the middle of it, if possible, of course.
Yeah, I'm not able to answer this question from personal experience, at least as a non-US citizen coming to a US university or US employer. I can talk about the other direction, and I think there will be some overlap here. And certainly want to echo what the other two panelists have said about, you know, being honest with what's out there, and you don't have to put everything. But I would warn that any company worth working for will already know about this. They'll know this is an issue. They'll know when to ask it and how to ask it, especially within the US. In other countries, however, you have to be careful that the company that you're working for does know about it. I've seen, you know, people applying to other countries, and someone really wants them, but that company or that university was not aware of what the visa processes were, or just said, oh yeah, it won't be a problem. And it turns out it is a problem. So I think within the US, if that company doesn't know to ask you that question, or at some point, that is a clear sign to move somewhere else, to go somewhere else. And I would say the same for anywhere else that you're going to. If the issue of, okay, what is your visa status, or what do we have to do to get you employed here, doesn't come up at some point, that's a warning sign that that company doesn't know what they're doing.
Thank you. So I know you said that you couldn't respond from the perspective of non-US, but going along to that, like, how did you cope with like homesickness and loneliness when you were in China? And for the other two panelists, like when you're here? Because I mean, it's a really completely different culture. Like,
yes, it was. I mean, I had the advantage of, I brought some of my home with me, right? My wife and children came with me, and so we all had to deal with it together. But it is real. I mean, the homesickness is real. The culture shock, cultural differences, those are real as well. And some people are able to deal with it better than others. I think the thing that I always had to remind myself and say to some of my other expats that were there that were having a hard time or saw something was to always just start reminding myself to remove the assumption that just because something's different, you know, doesn't mean it's wrong, right? Different is just different. And there are times where you culturally you are exposed to something that is very different from what you grew up with. And the knee-jerk response is say, well, that's just wrong then. And you have to step back and say, okay, maybe it's not. Maybe, you know, open my mind a bit. But eventually, it kind of, you know, having to do that every day, all the time, gets challenging. So it's always important to maintain some sort of community, whether it be, you know, regularly calling back home, or connecting with family, or, you know, finding a community of people that, you know, once a week or whatever, you can just get together and complain, not because everything's wrong, just because the stress builds up. And if you try to just think that you can swallow it all and I'm just going to get over this, it won't work. You have to vent at some point or another, and maybe all of you could share a very similar experience coming back here to finding some of your compatriots and just venting for a bit, and then you're done. You're ready to take on the day again.
Yeah, very interesting perspective, Jason. I have two suggestions based on personal experience. So in the private sector, and I imagine in other sectors as well, there are many institutions now that have these community networks or culture networks. It's definitely the case in the companies I've worked for. For example, the Latinos or Hispanic community network, there is like the Asian network, etc. So there is great awareness on the needs of minority populations, especially in the US. So my advice is check them out, take advantage of them, because those networks are designed to make you feel at home, as well as to connect with people who are like you. And often those networks hold events that bring very high profile executives or very engaging events. And one of the most important things that those networks do, in my view, is that they're not exclusive groups, they're open to anyone. So you not only connect with people who are like you, you also connect with great advocates, people who may not look like you, but they're interested in your culture, they're interested in your community, and that's a very powerful connection to have. The second thing that I have done personally is to give back. I have found the American Chemical Society as my best avenue to do so, so through voluntarism and giving back, especially to those who you identify with, for example, in my case, students, who I say, wow, that was me 20 years ago, you know, as well as professionals early in their career. You know, it's something that have been very fulfilling for me. So those are my two advices I have in that topic.
So I will actually very separate this question, because for me, the homesickness and loneliness are very different. Personally, I have actually not had homesickness, and I have like started moving out of France like 16 years ago now, and moving in all my different countries. The first time I've experienced in my life the feeling of homesickness is when I left Boston. So somehow my heart was belonging a bit in Boston, and I've loved multiple places. I've like lived in France, but I think I've always been moving to my next opportunity and being in the traveling world, and I've not so much feel the homesickness even now. So that's, but like what has been important for me is more to fight the loneliness, because each time you move, and as I've mentioned, like I've moved a lot. Actually, before to arrive to Indianapolis, in 12 years, I had actually lived in 15 different places. So if you count, it's like more than once a year moving, and very often moving from one country to another. So I was, you know, each time even if you keep contact with your friends and with the Zoom, the internet, the Skype and all this stuff, but it's still different than being there, and you feel that you miss, you know, the birthdays or stuff like this, and you need to each time restart having friends. And so I saw you mentioned it, like being open to the world and just like meeting people. And so I will meet people from the new local country, but also other foreigners, and very often as a foreigner, when you do the first step and you start talking, then people are open. First, they let you often in your bubble, but then if you start doing the first step, people will also come in, and you can do a lot of activity and find your new hub. So now I have a hub, you know, in every country I've been in pretty much, and live this way. But I will also mention for people who are not as lucky as me with the homesickness, like Sergio, like look for your local like culture. I mean, I know for me, there is a French connection. It's called the French connection. You have it everywhere in the world. Every city has this stuff called the French connection, where you always have a place where people meet at least monthly and do stuff and celebrate their culture scene. And as you said, same thing, they will have the French people expat, but they will also have the local who are so in love with the culture. And that's a great way to network and to do new people. And you will always find this. I don't go there too often because it annoys me when people keep complaining that they don't find good French croissant. And I just want to say, well, go back to France if you want your French croissant, or bake them yourself. But like, stop complaining about the French croissant not finding in Indianapolis. So that's why I'm not good to be there, because when people vent, I'm actually like bitching back. Sorry, so it's not good. But so you will just be open, be tolerant of other, and other will be tolerant of you.
Good. Thank you for all the answers. We have one question from the attendees, and they say, before you worked internationally yourself and received from your mentors, is there anything that they said that stuck with you the most, or anything that you now disagree with?
I'm patiently waiting for my co-panelists to handle this
Yeah,
potato.
well, I mean, it is a hot. I mean, there's certainly plenty of things that I disagreed with. I'm looking through the attendees, and I see at least one of them had the same mentor as me. So I'm gonna hold back from saying any things that they disagreed with. But things that stuck with me the most. I mean, part of why I went was just part of the suggestions from my PhD and postdoc advisor. Both of them were involved internationally, and they went out to various different places, and basically the advice is don't underestimate any part of the world, and there's talent everywhere, and you can learn from every experience. And I said it earlier, like this whole stepping outside of your comfort zone. As a chemist, doing research, that's something that hopefully you become familiar with. That we spend a lot of our time intentionally outside of our comfort zone, because if you're studying things that are already known, well, then you're not doing research. How far do you take that? And so I took it, maybe a little too far. But all of us have, in exploring that other culture and being willing to do that. I mean, that was advice they gave me that has stuck with me. It's like, okay, if you're in your comfort zone, you're not advancing either yourself or your career, or science for that matter. So that's something that's really stuck with me and had inspired me to seek out international opportunities, and to help other students as well as faculty, to help them consider stepping outside of their comfort zones, to see that the world is a bigger place.
I think for me, it's not so much something that my advisor told me, but like, he created a bunch of opportunities for me. Like, as I mentioned, I went to Italy and Tufts University, both during my 3 years PhD, because in France it's 3 years. And this idea of like, seize any opportunity and don't be afraid, because it's international. And yes, there will be all the hurdle of finding visa and location and can you speak the language. I mean, I went to Italy, I didn't know any word of Italian. I mean, I learned in the months I had between my PhD advisor telling me, do you want to go there? And me being there. And it was, very weird. Like, I was living in a 1 hour walk of the university, and it's in Venice. So, well, you either take the boat bus or you actually walk. So, but like, I mean, I don't regret it at all. So I think it's really not thinking too long, especially when you're still in grad student and if you don't have yet a family or something. It's just like jump on everything, and then you can decide if it was maybe not so good. But if you don't live it, you will never know if it would have been wonderful or not. So seizing any opportunity, I've definitely lived by it, and I'm so happy now that I'm actually put for like the last 5 years. Also, I think I almost enjoyed COVID to be stuck in city and not traveling so much anymore after all that. But it was, yeah, single and not burn any bridges, because you don't know when you will need your network, even if you don't like where you are. Like, always go out of any places with a smile and having people having a smile. Don't have anybody being mad at you. Solve any issue before you leave, and that's very important, because networking, especially in this big world where we need to all work together, to go back to our theme of the session, you will need the other people, and you will need the network. And my last thing, which is a little bit on the side, but I know it's my experience, and I've talked to a lot of students who was experienced too, you sometimes need to be wary of family and friends' good advice, because I know in my family still don't understand why I'm here. You know, like, why am I with these Yankees people, as I call it there? You know, it's like, it's just, they don't understand why I moved away any of the time I moved around. And sometimes it was not their life, it was not for them, and that's okay. But don't, if you talk too much about your family and direct friend, and they might be against, it doesn't always mean that it's the best advice. It might just mean that it's not for them, and so they cannot really advise you to go. And of course, they will be sad of seeing you leave. But very often, you need one person to be the first one to go there and establish. And then, by the way, they love to come to visit you afterwards. So it's usually just on the spot. They're like, "Oh, are you sure? How will you go there? You don't even speak the language. You will not have bank account there." Like, they can come up with a million reasons not to go, but I only need one reason to go. It's like, it's a good opportunity for me to try. So don't let people stop you.
I'll comment in terms of after your degrees, your academic degrees, because back when I was in school, both in undergraduate and graduate school, I thought that, all right, I finished my PhD, for example, and I had a mentor. Now I'm good to go. I'll never need a mentor. Or was I wrong? So all throughout your career, after you finish your studies, I strongly recommend new professionals to keep a mentor, seek a mentor. And actually, there are three types of mentors or coaches. I like to say that you have mentors, you have coaches, and you have advocates. The mentor is that person that can give you advice when you need somebody you can talk to for guidance. The coach, think about it as a sports coach. It's someone who can make you a better professional, someone who can make you better at what you do through guidance and engagement, right? Then you have advocates, who are those who make their resources available to you to make you successful. So I encourage everyone to seek to have all types, have mentors, coaches, and advocates throughout your career, because they can do a lot for you. We have mentioned or touched the topic in multiple occasions about networks. I like to make a comment about this because it's very important to have a network, to build your network and work actively on it. But don't have the expectation that because you went to a couple of conferences, you talked to these people, you're gonna have something happen for you in the next few months. The way the network works is that you build it, you continuously do that throughout your career, and out of the blue, an opportunity or a door is gonna open for you years down the road. I'll give a personal example, is that, as I mentioned at the very beginning, I'm in a career transition. It's something I pursue myself. I wanted to go now after working in the agriculture, material science, personal care, and home care industries, etc. throughout my career. I wanted to pursue the next chapter in the pharmaceutical industry. And it happened through a door that opened for me thanks to someone I met 8 years ago. So it's not, next month, it may not be next year, it may be next decade that having that connection will help you. So if you do that continuously throughout, then you increase the probability that something will happen in your favor.
Thank you. I have one question more like from the perspective of being international in the US and from the perspective of being US citizen. How, as a community, we can make it better for international fellows, like our international peers, how we work together as a community, even if we are international, how can we work together and make it more welcoming for international students or colleagues?
The first word or concept which come to mind for me is having people really being tolerant on the workplace. And when I say tolerant, I mean that on the big term, because we mentioned it even earlier, versus not making assumption, or like not considering that there is only one way, which is the right way, or there is a wrong way, or something like this. And I think, to my own experience as an international here, sometime when you're in a community where there is too many US national and not enough international, they tend to forget that stuff might not be known to us, you know, like, or even things like Thanksgiving, you know, it's like Thanksgiving only happened here in a way, or here in Canada, but in Canada it's another day, you know, it's a Monday, it's like, even something as little like this, like what I've seen, the best action is, for example, people say, hey, I'm having something with my family, well, you're not from here, come, you know, so include people and be tolerant in both directions, and be like, oh, you have the special holidays, well, tell me about it. And so ask them, so the other culture tell, because this is usually, especially, I mean, I'm thinking of the holidays, but because I think these special days are usually very in the culture of each individual, because when we were kids, we were doing them with our parents, and even in the same country, people will have different culture. Coming from northeast of France, we have very different tradition than southwest of France when I did my PhD, but people like to share about them because it's their childhood, their memories, and usually it's actually very fun to learn about the other people too. So even just like being told about this and listening about it, and then see if you can make it happen, it's something which is practical, but it's, I think it makes people feel so much more welcome so fast to be able to do that. And I will also give the opposite thing, which also is by personal experience, but like it sometimes it really bothers me, is also don't assume that because people are foreigners, they are stupid. Like, I mean, it's not, I don't think that they estimate that people are stupid, but like you have some people saying, you know, using an expression, and then they're like, oh, you're foreigner, you must not know that. Like I have someone did this recently to me, and it's like, oh, I'm sorry, I said stopping something called Turkey. Why am I saying this to a foreigner? Well, it would make no sense to a foreigner how stopping cold turkey would mean. It's like, dude, I've been here for 15 years. You know, of course I know what stopping cold turkey means. You know, it's just like you get something. So maybe if you want to say, oh, did you understand that? Ask a question, but don't assume that people don't understand things just because they were not born here. So that's kind of where, for me, the tolerance come into place, because if you go open-minded to saying, everything will go so much more smoothly, and then we can learn from each other. And when we can learn from each other, we work better together, and then we do better things in general.
Yeah, I agree. So there are a couple of things that come to mind. I definitely being open-minded and not making assumptions is the best thing anyone can do in any interaction, actually. I mean, it doesn't matter if someone is from a different country or from the US. When you are having an interaction with someone, just not making assumptions that the person knows or doesn't know, or that some trait comes with a background, all of those assumptions can get you into trouble very quickly. The second piece, actually, it's an advice for us, for those who are multicultural, who have lived outside of the US, who have the international experience. It's to be willing to teach, to be patient, and to understand that if somebody inquires, it's because they're curious and they want to learn. You know, I found myself often, and years ago, when somebody would hear my accent and they would immediately ask where you're from, and I would say, you know, Delaware or Philadelphia, or, you know, and then they would say, well, no, where are you really from? You know, at first I had a negative reaction to that, but then I learned over time, they just want to know. And often it led to a very pleasant conversation, you know, about Latinos or about the Dominican Republic, etc. So I'm always willing to teach. I'm always willing to engage on the topic. It's something that we need to do in order to remove stereotypes and to let people learn about who we are. So I am definitely, I always receive that question now as if it comes from a different angle, a positive angle. So I think that's something we can do actively, you know, just to educate and help ourselves and the community just understand diversity.
Yeah, and to speak from, you know, or for or towards those U.S. citizens here that want to be an advocate for international students or international employees. You know, Sergio mentioned that you know, that's one thing that they should look for as an advocate. So how to be an advocate is to, first of all, you know, take the time and effort to understand some of just the fundamental logistical challenges that an international student or employee has to go through. This was something that I was the first foreign science faculty in basically all of China at the time. So no one had done it for a long time. So when I got there, I didn't speak any Chinese, and they were very generous and helpful in that. More so, I was embarrassed because I'm trying to imagine a foreign student coming to the U.S. that didn't speak any English, and how would they have been treated? But no one there actually knew how to even get me put into the system. The system only allowed you to type in 3 or 4 characters, and my name is more than that. And so how could I even get paid? Like, those sort of logistical issues just were not even thought about beforehand. And things that to a U.S. citizen would say, oh, well, that's obvious. Well, it's not obvious to someone coming in from another culture. So just understand that fundamental onboarding process is stressful and it's different. And if you want to be an advocate, identify areas that can be issues to help walk them through those. And also understand that in many cases, especially for employees, they're most likely not coming by themselves. I think most U.S. employers do a pretty good job of not just thinking about the employee, but thinking about the employee's family. But I'm not certain most universities, especially for students, think about this. And so understanding that, okay, maybe this student speaks English, but maybe their spouse or partner does not. And that's going to create extra challenges for them, that if you want to be an advocate, okay, how do I help out? How can I, you know, what opportunities and learning experiences are available for those people? Instead of saying, oh yeah, just go check it out. You know, have that in your information right away. So you go, okay, here's some of the things you're going to have to deal with, or your partner might have to deal with. Here you go. Here, and let me walk you to there.
Thank you. We have one question from the attendees and say, DEI has been a big focus in the US. Has this picked up outside of the US? Does it look different? Well, from my perspective, from Brazil, it does not look different. It is a big issue in Brazil too.
Yeah, I will say, well, first of all, I think it's true. Well, every other country that I've been in, that's also always been something. What is different, I will say, is sometimes the timeline. Because, for example, I know when I was still living in France, we had other big peaks of people really focusing at one point with different culture, and at another point was really a lot of policy change versus male and female. We had this parity thing, which was a big deal, where you could not even have a small community. Bylaws will already need to have a certain proportion of female versus male, and creating a lot of other implication with it. But I had to smile, I have to say, with the formulation of the question, to say, has it been picked up outside? Because, well, actually we had it before the US, in some cases, and some other. I mean, if we go back to history, it's just staggered at different moments, But I did not think of the US as being the first force of doing it. And maybe now, like that, I know that when I was asking my parents in France and my friends in Europe, like, oh, is it a big deal from now? So they were having ripple effect of the same stuff here, and it was coming back in the same time, true. But like it's, we had it at a higher level, I would say, at other moment of the period of time. But it's clearly a problem everywhere. But sometimes it's also a different race. I mean, in France, it was actually the bigger racial issue was actually targeting other type of race, but not just black and white. There was other aspect, not to reduce it here to this, but I think each country, because it's another culture or other history, will have their own version of it. But unfortunately, you cannot escape it yet in the world. I think we need to do a jump in the future, hopefully, to get to a point where all the diversity, equity, inclusion will be something of the past, because it's clearly something we still all need to work on everywhere.
Yeah, without pointing any particular fingers at certain countries, I would say, no, it's not picking up everywhere. In some places, it, like Frederique mentioned, they're ahead of the US, well ahead. In other places, it is in no way, shape, or form a priority. And if you mention it, it's like, you know, bouncing a ball off a brick wall or something like that. It just comes right back at you, and it doesn't go anywhere.
I agree with my co-panelists, with Frederique and Jason. Now, what can we do about it? I guess is the follow-up question to this. I think learn from the countries that have been successful in their efforts, and where you have gender equality or a smaller gap, right, compared to the US, or compared to other countries that are on track or that are making the effort. And of course, it's not only gender. I mean, you also have the race disparity, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, sure, the US is making an effort, but if there are any other nations that are ahead of us, we should explore, see what is it that they did, how did they do it, and instead of reinventing the wheel in certain efforts or pockets, just implementing what has proven to be successful. It's something that we need to do more often. I think in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's something that we can do more.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I would like to thank the panelists. It was like a pleasure to have you here at Predict with us. And also, if the attendees have any other questions, they can post on the community board, and then we can just keep it going with the discussion there. Thank you.